And now the Deeper Thinking podcast, a daily exploration into how philosophy, psychology, and technology shape how we think, feel, and live. If you found value in these conversations, if they resonate with your curiosity about life's deeper questions, we'd really appreciate it if you'd leave a review on iTunes. Your words help others find their way here and give us a warm, fuzzy feeling. Thank you.
Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. This episode is about how our emotions, identities, and experiences are not reactions to the world as it is, but constructions shaped by the brain's constant act of prediction, woven from memory, expectation, and cultural inheritance. It reframes anxiety as a predictive error rather than an invader, explores trauma as a meaning-making process between past and present rather than a simple event, and offers a slow, deliberate vision of agency. Not dominance over life, but the persistent, fragile crafting of new predictions and possibilities through small, repeated acts of attention and action. The episode invites the listener to move from being a passive reactor to a quiet architect of their own becoming. Anxiety is often mistaken for a foreign invader, an unbidden force that storms the mind without warning. Yet beneath its urgency lies a quieter, more intricate story. The mind, striving to survive, constructs its experience not from direct encounters with reality, but from predictions stitched together from the remembered past. Every feeling, every reflex, every flare of fear is shaped not only by what is present, but by what was once endured, assumed, or imagined. Meaning itself is not something we find waiting in the world. It is something we actively build again and again through the interplay of sensation and memory. In this essay, we explore how the predictive architecture of the brain shapes the experience of selfhood, emotion, and suffering, and how, by understanding this architecture, we might begin to reclaim a small but real agency within it. What emerges is not a promise of complete control, but a deeper, steadier freedom, the kind built slowly, through deliberate acts of attention, gentle exposures to surprise, and the quiet, persistent labour of reshaping what we expect from the world and from ourselves. Anxiety, often imagined as an invading force, is instead the body's improvisation upon incomplete information, a predictive error woven into flesh. It is not an alien interruption, but the body's own attempt at navigating uncertainty using broken maps. The pulse quickens, breath shallows, muscles tense, not because the world demands it, but because the remembered echoes of similar moments once did. Prediction mistakes itself for reality. The body braces for blows that may never come. This is not failure, but fidelity, the brain's devotion to survival, even at the cost of serenity. Yet knowing this fractures the old story. Anxiety is not a flaw to be eradicated, but a song to be retuned. The work is not to silence the body's warnings, but to patiently teach it new melodies, small, sustained improvisations that alter the score over time. Exposure becomes a gentle rebellion, a series of rehearsals against fear's certainty. By deliberately stepping toward the feared, by dosing oneself with tolerable surprises, the body slowly learns to guess differently. The aim is not to erase the past, but to loosen its grip, to allow the present's unfamiliarity to soften old expectations. In this slow recalibration, agency flickers to life, not as dominance, but as the possibility of composition. One cannot unwrite history, but one can compose new endings to old beginnings, layering present action over inherited dread. Suffering thus shifts from fate to form, something that, though never fully optional, can be shaped. In this way, anxiety's narrative bends, not eradicated, not denied, but transfigured, turned from prophecy into possibility. According to this understanding, trauma is not an isolated wound, but a continuity error in the body's predictive text, where past injuries bleed forward into the grammar of new experience. The body, tasked with survival, chooses safety over accuracy, rehearsing old responses as if they were universally required. Thus, a raised voice in a room today reverberates with the violence of years ago. A harmless glance is freighted with imagined menace. The present collapses into the template of the past, not because the mind insists on suffering, but because the body quietly prioritizes protection above discovery. Healing, then, is not achieved by argument or revelation, but by offering the body better data, patiently, relentlessly, without spectacle. One must become both the author and the reader of new scripts, constructing new prediction patterns, not by wishing for change, but by practicing different actions in the thick of fear's certainty. To stand still when instinct demands flight, to breathe slow when the chest tightens, to let the unknown remain unknown without collapsing it into the worst possible shape. In doing so, the body is coaxed, not commanded, into less defensive futures. This work cannot be rushed. It must proceed at the nervous system's pace, in small wages of trust against the old certainties. Responsibility here is not blame, it is stewardship. The recognition that while the past's pain is not one's fault, the future's possibilities require one's participation. In this frame, agency emerges not as heroic triumph, but as quiet persistence, the cumulative force of countless small refusals to reenact the same suffering twice. The predictive brain does not wait for the world to reveal itself. It moves first, generating an internal rehearsal that reality may confirm or disrupt. This preemptive choreography governs not only action, but perception itself. What is seen, felt, believed are consequences of what was expected. Attention is not a passive intake, but an active construction, a filtering process that amplifies, fits the prediction, and muffles what does not. Thus, even the plainest moment becomes a canvas, pre-painted by the brain's silent anticipations. Where predictions are rigid, the canvas darkens with old fears, grievances, and assumed dangers. Where predictions are supple, experience remains porous, capable of surprise. The task of living with greater agency, then, is not to seek perfect knowledge, but to maintain a kind of predictive humility, a willingness to be wrong about the next moment and to move anyway. Novelty must be cultivated like a fragile crop, not in overwhelming floods that drown the system, but in careful, deliberate exposures that test the borders of the familiar without shattering them. Every successful encounter with a prediction error seeds the soil for future flexibility. This is the quiet discipline of freedom, practicing a readiness to revise, allowing the present to interrupt the past. Against the tide of overlearned certainty, each small act of openness is an act of resistance, a way of protecting the mind from hardening into caricature. Thus, living well is not a matter of having better maps, but of being willing to redraw them, again and again, in the uncertain light of what is actually here. Culture, often mistaken for background scenery, is in fact a primary architect of prediction. It furnishes the templates from which the brain draws its anticipations. What danger looks like, what love should feel like, what success demands. These templates are not neutral. They carry the biases, hopes, traumas, and blind spots of generations. A gesture, a tone, a silence, all acquire meaning through culturally transmitted associations. Thus, what feels natural or inevitable is often merely rehearsed. Social media, with its rapid cycles of contagion, magnifies this architecture, offering an endless stream of meanings ready for adoption, without the slow friction of lived negotiation. To scroll is to be enrolled in countless invisible scripts, each seeding new predictive pathways, each narrowing or expanding the brain's guesses about what life can be. In this landscape, agency demands vigilance, not paranoia, but an active curation of what one allows to shape the body's forward lean into experience. Exposure cannot be eliminated, it can only be chosen with greater care. Attention itself becomes an ethical act, a cultivation of the inner terrain from which action and feeling will inevitably grow. Thus, the modern challenge is not simply to think differently, but to choose differently where and how the roots of future predictions are planted. It is to recognize that every exposure, every repeated image, every mimicked sigh or celebrated fear carries with it not only a temporary mood, but the blueprint for a tomorrow that will feel to the brain like fate. At the heart of change lies not the dramatic breakthrough, but the quiet accumulation of small ruptures in prediction. The body does not rewire itself in a single act of will. It learns slowly through repeated encounters where old expectations fail to fully explain the present. Each moment of dissonance, each slight mismatch between anticipation and sensation becomes a micro aperture through which transformation can seep. Yet these apertures must be kept open long enough for new patterns to take root. The temptation to flee back into the comfort of old certainties is strong. The brain, metabolically conservative, favours efficiency over truth. To endure the discomfort of prediction error without collapse is thus a rare and difficult art. It demands practices that do not seek immediate reward, but trust in the cumulative power of gentle disconfirmation. It demands environments where novelty does not overwhelm but invites, where uncertainty is not annihilated but given room to breathe. In this slow labour, agency is built not as dominion but as endurance, the capacity to remain present with the unpredicted, to let it alter the body's rehearsal scripts before the mind even catches up. Growth becomes less a narrative of triumph and more a choreography of tolerated surprise. The meaningful life is not found in mastering reality, but in becoming capable of continual, imperfect participation in its unfolding. A participant who remembers that every encounter is also a rehearsal for future encounters, and that what is chosen now will echo forward into the mind's architecture long after the choice itself is forgotten. The self, often clutched at as a fixed centre, is revealed instead as a moving tapestry, woven from the interplay of prediction and error, memory and present sensation. Identity is not a hidden core waiting to be discovered, but a temporary stabilisation of patterns the brain constructs to navigate uncertainty. Who one is at any given moment is the provisional answer the body gives to the question of survival, shaped by the accumulated scripts of culture, history, and personal rehearsal. Thus, there is no singular true self trapped beneath layers of experience. There are only patterns more or less flexible, more or less available to revision. Freedom lies not in peeling away these layers to find an imagined original, but in cultivating the plasticity to reweave them, to allow the self to be updated by the honest friction of living. Rigidity masquerades as authenticity. But true authenticity is a dynamic fidelity to what one is becoming, not what one has been. The deepest integrity is not preservation, but responsiveness, the capacity to change without rupture, to evolve without betrayal. In this light, selfhood becomes a project rather than a possession, a lifelong choreography between what is remembered and what is possible. To live well is to understand that every new action, every revised prediction is not a deviation from the self, but a continuation of its making. In this slow, recursive becoming, presence itself is the anchor, not a fixed identity, but an enduring openness to revision, a loyalty not to what one once predicted, but to the ever-unfolding experiment of existence. To live as a participant is to accept that the mind's architecture will never achieve perfect clarity, that every perception will always bear the bias of prior expectations. Yet this is not cause for despair. It is the condition of possibility itself. If the world were passively received, it would remain fixed, inert. Because it is actively constructed, it can be differently constructed, over and over again. Attention becomes a tool of transformation, not merely observation. Repetition becomes rehearsal for a life slightly more open to revision. Even suffering, when approached with a predictive understanding, is reframed, not simply endured, but interrogated, its ancient script gently tested, softened, rewritten. The task is not to extinguish pain, but to loosen the tyrannies of meaning that bind it so tightly to identity. It is to allow grief to be grief, anger to be anger, without allowing them to calcify into permanent architectures of self. This demands a humility before one's own perceptions, a recognition that the mind is a fallible narrator even of its own story. And yet, paradoxically, it demands a fierceness too, a willingness to intervene in the construction of that story, to place new ingredients into the predictive soil, even when the old harvests seem inevitable. There is no end point where the self is finally resolved. There is only the continuous, fragile act of tending to the patterns that build tomorrow's world inside the body today. To live meaningfully is to tend this garden with deliberate care, knowing that every movement, every exposure, every refusal to collapse too quickly into certainty becomes a quiet architecture for the future self who will inherit it. There is no arrival, only the continual, unfinished work of becoming. Every breath carries forward 1,000 silent rehearsals, 1,000 inherited guesses, many of them invisible, many of them mistaken. Yet each breath also carries the faint possibility of interruption, the chance that attention sharpened by understanding and softened by patience might notice a fissure in the old script. These small moments, when a reflex slows, when a fear is met with a steadier gaze, when an inherited sorrow is held without full submission, are the true loci of change. They are rarely celebrated, They do not announce themselves. Yet they form the secret infrastructure of transformation, slowly bending the future away from inevitability and toward possibility. Agency is not the invention of a self ex nihilo. It is the practiced art of weaving new threads into the living fabric of prediction. It is a stubborn faith in the mutability of even the oldest structures, a refusal to let the past be the sole architect of the present. To live is to construct. To construct is to choose. To choose is to bear responsibility not for the world as it is, but for the shape of one's participation within it. Even when freedom is narrow, even when the margin for change is small, the act of choosing, however slight, remains an act of authorship. In this view, meaning is not given, nor is it discovered fully formed. It is built moment by moment, through the quiet, persistent work of tending to the predictive soil from which every thought, every feeling, every possible future will grow. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Deeper Thinking podcast. Today's episode was narrated by Holly, our digital narrator, who helps bring our ideas to life. Thank you for your positive reviews on Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help keep us visible so others can discover and enjoy our content.